For those of you I have not met, especially online, my name is Stephanie Schneider. I'm the American Baptist Youth Program Coordinator for American Baptist Churches of New York State, and it is my privilege to introduce our next speaker. Kelly works with Young Life of New York, and she is here to tell us a little bit more about where you can find youth and how to connect with them, especially for those of us who have churches who don't have any youth in them. So please help me welcome Kelly.
Thank you, guys. I have worked for Young Life for about 20 years, but I was also a kid who went through Young Life, and I grew up in the Methodist church in my town. I was one of very few children. I live in Cazenovia, New York, and we have about 100 kids per grade, and very few of us were going to church. And I remember that my third grade Sunday school teacher. I don't know if you ever did Bible drills where you had to put your thumbs on, right, and pop it down. She taught us how to do that. We had a board in our classroom where she would remove different books of the Bible, and we'd have to come in and put them back on, and I memorized everything because she gave away highlighters. It was a pen on one side and a highlighter on the other side, and I wanted that. And so she was one of the first people to really delve deeply into me and my faith, and I had no idea she was doing it. And so I share that because I don't often teach out of this Bible anymore, but this is the Bible that Mrs. Frankowski gave me when I graduated from high school. And it is a Bible that got me through college and all of the difficulties that I struggled with. It is a Bible that got me through the first 5 years of my marriage, and the Bible that got me through my first 2 children out of the 4 that we have. It saw me through a lot of loss. It saw me through a lot of pain. It saw me through a lot of joy and a lot of celebration. But as you can see, it's a little worse for wear. And so thanks to some red duct tape, I was able to salvage. I do believe I'm missing a few pages of either Leviticus or Numbers, but the pages literally started falling out, and I've tried my best to salvage this book. And yesterday, I was reading a devotion that was talking about this kind of idea, and I wanted to read you a little part of it. It says, in George MacDonald's classic novel, The Baron's Apprenticeship, Richard Tuke is a young man, the son of a bookbinder. He's fascinated by old books. He begins buying decaying volumes deemed worthless by others and becomes skilled at repairing them so well that an estate owner hires him to move in and repair the books in his vast personal library. I hadn't even finished the first page of the story when I was moved by this passage. Love and power combined made him look on these dilapidated, slow-wasting abodes of human thought and delight with healing compassion. Indeed, with the passion of healing, the worst gnawed by the tooth of insect time, the farther down any choice book in the steep decline of years, the more intent that Richard was on having it. The more and more skillful he grew, not only in rebinding, but in restoring the very tone of their constitution. Through love, he moved from artisan to artist. And I think that they go on to talk about, the author says, that's how God looks at our damaged lives. And I would say that if you look out at the young people of our society, you will see a broken, damaged lot. You don't have to look too far in the news to find the pain that our next generation is in, the anxiety-ridden culture that we live in, the diagnosed and medicated students who walk through the halls of the schools. And you know, when you first have a baby in a community, there is great joy, and everybody just stares at that baby and plays with that baby, and people like want to work in the nursery. By the time you're 2, you're told you're terrible, right? And by the time you get to middle school, I had the privilege of speaking to about 200 middle schoolers this fall who told me that the adults in their life think that they're chaotic, awkward, loud, and all of these negative terms that they all have now internalized and believe about themselves. And if we're all honest, we probably have all said something about a middle school student. When people say to me, I'm so glad that you're called to that ministry. It shows me their lack of understanding that we're all called to the ministry of loving the youth in our communities. Whether they are babies, middle schoolers, high schoolers, college students, young singles, they are treasured. And I love the title of this training today, that we need to treasure them and show that. And so in reading about the restoration of books, there is a restoration ministry that is available to us when we work with teenagers. And it is the joy of their salvation that we get to see when we walk with them long enough, when we're consistent with them, when we show up in their lives. When I was first training in this job for Young Life, it wasn't even my job, it was just a volunteer position that I took back in 1997 with Young Life. I was a sophomore in college, and they read me from an article called It Ought To. And I don't even know who the author is. I've tried over the years to figure this out, but it says that ministry ought to be difficult enough to make you weep for others, that you might become more compassionate. That ministry ought to be difficult enough to make you weep for others, that you might become more compassionate. And as we win ourselves to Christ, it continues and says, a true ministry is the ministry that helps you become more like Jesus Christ, more in love with God, and more in love with people. So what's your advertisement in your own church to get people to jump on board with these broken, damaged youth? This is about them and their place of coming to a ministry that helps them become more like Jesus, helps them become more in love with God, and helps them to become more in love with people. But what do you do when the kids have stopped coming to you, right? What do you do then? Because a classic ministry model would tell you that this is what happens, that the church is going to have an event, and everybody is going to invite everybody, and they're all going to show up, right? Well, I'm on a pastor's committee in my town, and a lot of the pastors that I work with are saying, well, all of my people are saying we need young families. We really need you to do all the work, to get all these young families here. And we need you. They don't even have a youth person. They just have the main pastor of the church and a secretary, right? An administrator. And they can't possibly, as one person, reach out to the entire community, especially because most of these pastors that I'm working with in my town have just moved here from somewhere else. They haven't grown up in this town. They don't know how it works. They're just learning what's going on. And so what do you do when people stop coming to the events that you're advertising? Well, Jesus shows us, as Jake was talking about, that Jesus became flesh. He didn't just stay in heaven with God and assume that we would get this. Right? He came to us in the flesh, and that word for flesh, that dirty, dingy flesh. There's a Christmas song by Michael W. Smith that says, "Welcome to our world. I hope that you don't mind our manger." The idea that the God of the universe was born in a barn stable and came to us as a dirty, dingy flesh is the model that we have for ministry. It's the model that we have for leaving the comfort of what we know and what we can do and going out to where the people are. And we saw that 20% of churches closed their doors during COVID. They are no more, and you're here because you haven't done that yet. But we know that there's an extinction that can cause us to all shut our doors and not be able to pay the heat and all of those things. But that's not our motivation for ministry. My pastor told me, she's like, I am not worried about butts in the chairs. I'm worried about hearts coming to know Jesus. And so that compassion that we get as we read the news, as we look out at what teenagers are facing, we want to empathize with them. We want to know what they're feeling. We want to understand what their life is. And so we need to go to them. And a lot of teenagers would tell you, like, I'm just busy. And it is legitimately true. You live in a small town. My students are working. Some of them are working a couple of jobs right now because they can, and because there aren't enough workers to run McDonald's and to run our restaurants. I live in Casanova's a lake town. In the summer, I joke with people that if we lost the teenagers, the whole town would shut down because they rely on the teenagers to run the ice cream shops, to run the bowling alley, to run the yacht club that we have, to do all of the different jobs in town. It's the teenagers who are running them. So then we're asking them to come to more and more events that we're having. They simply don't have the time. They're working, they're trying to do a sport. If you live in a small town, there's so many opportunities. You don't necessarily have to try out and be afraid of being cut from the team because there's room for you to play and do the school play and play an instrument and. Then you also have the kids who don't do anything, but they don't want to do anything. They want to sit in their house and play video games. They want to hide from the world. They have some social anxieties. They don't want to leave. And they certainly don't want to enter into your building that they're not sure that is a safe place that they can trust. And so I want to give you some really practical things today. And I want to start with this. Henry Nouwen wrote this, and I love what he says. He says, more and more the desire grows in me simply to walk around, greet people, enter their homes, sit on their doorsteps, play ball, throw water, and be known as someone who wants to live with them. It's a privilege to have the time to practice this simple ministry of presence. Still, it's not as simple as it seems. My own desire to be useful, to do something significant, or to be a part of some impressive project is so strong that soon my time is taken up by meetings, conferences, study groups, and workshops that prevent me from walking the streets. It's difficult not have plans, not to organize people around an urgent cause, and not to feel that you are working directly for social progress. But I wonder more and more if the first thing shouldn't be to know people by name. To know people by name. To eat and drink with them. To listen to their stories. And to tell your own. And to let them know with words, handshakes, and hugs that you do not simply like them, but truly love them. And I am sure that you guys are already doing a lot more than you think that you're doing. I'm sure that you're doing a lot more than you think that you're doing. Because every place that you enter, you are the light of Jesus to the people that you are with. And so there are so many examples of Jesus going to the people and spending time with the people. And he did say, come and follow me. He also said, come and see. Come and see. And so I want to look today, actually not at Jesus particularly, because it would be easy if you were Jesus, right? This would be a pretty simple ministry if we all, could channel that every day. But Philip is actually in the book of Acts, and Philip is a deacon in the church alongside Stephen. And right after Stephen is stoned to death, Philip continues to travel to Samaria. And there he's preaching God's word and he is performing miracles. And so I'm going to pick up in Acts chapter 8. And I'll read it, and I have it on the screen for you too, if you don't have it right with you. But here's our first thing that we want to do, is to pray. It says this, now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south to the road, the desert road, that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. So our first thing, and Jake talked about this in some of those 7 things, is we need to be spending time with the Lord in prayer. And so some of the ways that we do that in our community is we had a man, he used to collect yearbooks. So he started with the yearbook in our town, and he started to pray. He actually got to the point before he passed that he would get up at 4 a.m. because so many people had sent him yearbooks from all over the country to pray for kids by name. How many people are prayed for by name in a high school setting? And so that's what he did. He would get a yearbook and he would start to pray. And so that's what I do with my leaders. I, on our own printer, not at a copy center, which would be awkward, just to warn you, I make copies of my yearbook pages and I give it to my leaders. And if we can't be with students, we're going to be praying for students. And we lift them all up. And I find when I'm praying for kids that I don't know, then suddenly I meet them and I'm like, oh, Lord, this is so cool. You know, like I didn't know that you were going to bring that person in my path today. But I would say that would be the first place to start. And I didn't just have my leaders doing it. We have a committee of people who, similar to just some folks in your church, who said, you know what, I'd love to take a couple pages. I'm going to take these 2 pages. And my friend John, who's now in his late 70s, probably he'll be 80 this year probably, and he had 2 pages. And every time I saw him, how's Alex Woolsey doing? How's Alex? Because he faithfully prayed for that boy every single day. And so I'd find a prayer strategy. It might not be the yearbook for you, it might be a list, it might be something else, but find a way to pray for as many names of students as you can. And you could decide, hey, we're just going to start with 1 grade. We're just going to start with the middle school and watch them go through, whatever it is. Then if you see their name in the paper or in on an online forum that they won a game, you know, they're in a play, you can start to connect these names with the kids. The other thing that we do is we do prayer walks. So a lot of times you could pray in your church building, you can pray in your office, but we found is if you get a friend and the 2 of you walk around the high school, walk around the middle school. I have a geography in Casanova where I can walk around most of our churches, our college, our middle school and high school in 1 loop. And we do it over and over and over again. We pray for the students, we pray for the parents, we pray for the churches, we pray for our businesses, we pray for whatever we see coming around. Now, if you saw us walking, you would just think that we were talking. Because obviously you can't close your eyes while you're walking. But we do it on a regular basis. Sometimes we sit on the front lawn of the school and pray as leaders, but I like the walk because you see so much, you see so many needs, and the Lord moves with you. Like the walk to Emmaus as he walked behind those 2 men and entered in, that he's walking with us. And so that would be the first thing that I would say is create some sort of a prayer strategy around your community. And maybe you already have one and maybe you can incorporate. But I find in a lot of the small churches that I work in, most of the prayer requests on the list are needs of people who are having health situations, older people who are passing away. Very rarely do you see the names of young people being asked to pray for them. So that's where I would suggest you start. And the next thing is go. So we're going to hit 4 words: pray, go, meet, invite. So the second word being go, if we go back to Philip, it says, so he started out, and on his way he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of the treasury of Candace, the queen of the Ethiopians. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot, reading the book of Isaiah the prophet, and the Spirit told Philip, again, this is a Spirit-led mission. You're in prayer, Lord, tell me, where do I go? And it says, the Spirit told Philip, go to the chariot and stay near it. So as you look around your towns and your cities, you are an investigator. You may have seen this place a million times, but suddenly you're looking at the school and you're thinking, what do they value here? When I look at this building, what do they say that I value? I was a leader at Christian Brothers Academy in Syracuse for a little while, a Catholic school, and sports, 100%. You walk up there, the sports fields are bigger than the school, and they're front and center. You walk into my town and realize that it's not the students that are valued, it's the history, because we are stuck in a building that we should have left many years ago. If you just begin to investigate and figure out, let's just go on their websites and figure out what's going on right now. Let's look at their events calendar. What is happening? Be an investigator so that you begin to know, where should I go? Where do I go to find kids? And so here's a lot of really practical things. There are a lot of public school events that the whole town is invited to, tons of them. You can go to any varsity, JV, modified, or community sporting event. There is nobody there to tell you, hey, you're not allowed here. It's a public school event. You pay taxes, you're welcome. You can go to any of those events. Choose a sport. I had a leader this year, she's in her 60s, and she said, Kelly, I'm not sure what I should do. And I said, choose a sport and go to every game. Well, it turns out her niece is on the soccer team, and she said, you know what, I'm gonna go to every soccer game. Their families were estranged. Their families aren't estranged anymore because she showed up at every soccer game. And there's the school play. There are concerts, there are competitions. We have a Future Farmers of America, and they do an induction ceremony for that. There's National Honor Society. There are tons and tons of public school events. The other night, I don't know much about academic decathlon, but we sat at the academic decathlon spaghetti dinner. I can't even eat gluten, but I was at the spaghetti dinner. I will be at the FFA pancake breakfast. What are the public things that are already happening that you and a couple members from your church can just go and be a part of? And maybe there's already church members who go to this pancake breakfast at the school every year. Hop on board with them. Hey, can I come with you? Go to the places where kids are. There are also PTA or PTO. You, in some places, don't even have to be a parent to be a part of the PTA or the PTO, and they are desperate for help. They're desperate for people who want to pop popcorn and hand out gift bags and help with teacher appreciation brunches. And I for a while in my town, I was helping with Sunday school at our Baptist church in town, and they just knew that I was with Young Life, and they were in between pastors, and so they reached out, and I said, sure, that's the way I can help. We were in a move from one place to another. We'll come and help you do this. I had 4 students, but the consensus of the people in the church was, I did that when my kids were little. It's those parents' turn. Right? I see a head nodding, yes. Well, there was a man in that church, Bill. Bill was 89 years old, and Bill told me and told everybody else, nowhere in the Bible does it say that I am able to retire from the work of loving the children of God. Nowhere. And so Bill and I did all sorts of stuff together that year with my 4 Sunday school kids in the entire church. And he gave me a real vision for long-term ministry. It does not matter. A lot of people will say, well, Kelly, you need a young person to come in. Oh, the young people will know. Well, no, you don't. You need an available, willing heart who has compassion and empathy on this generation. And that can come in any shape or form. You can volunteer for a lot of things that you probably didn't realize you could volunteer for. You can become a volunteer coach, because volunteering means you don't get paid, so they don't have to give you anything in return, right? So find out if any sports need a volunteer coach. Find out, like I said, if the PTA needs help with any events. Is there a concession stand at any of your sporting events? Do they need people to make hot dogs so that the parents can watch their kids play in the games? Can you ref a game, even a smaller modified or community sport? Do they need timekeepers at the swim meet or the cross-country meet? Do they need you to come in and talk about what you do? We have a staff person for Young Life that was just invited into the middle school, one of them in the city of Syracuse, because she's a chiropractor. And they invited her to come in and talk about what her job is. Are there ways that you can engage at any level, elementary through college, with any young people and volunteer your time? Right now, the schools are also, this is more a paid position, they are desperate for substitute teachers. I mean, desperate. In my town, you come in, they send you to one room in the morning in the high school, and then you're running to the middle school in the afternoon, and then you're back to the high school, because they're just desperate. And so if you have one day a week, hey, I'm gonna substitute teach, or someone in your congregation, I'm gonna substitute teach, but I am gonna do it with a heart of ministry. I don't get to go into that classroom and talk about Jesus, but I bring him with me. I'm there in the school learning what it's like to be a high school student. We have Mrs. Graham. Mrs. Graham is pushing 90. She is a monitor for lunch and recess. This woman is an amazing miracle. She is telling those kids what to do. And almost all of our monitors are older people now. We have maybe one younger monitor. Mrs. Graham makes cookies for our entire elementary school twice a year. Every person in that school knows Mrs. Graham. Every kid. And she is a loving vision of Jesus' outreach. There are a lot of local places that kids hang out, and that's another way. Be an investigator. Figure out where they are. It used to be when I was a kid in the 80s, 90s, like you could see them kind of loitering in town. I don't think that happens as much as it used to. I think they actually are trying go somewhere and stay somewhere. Sometimes it's at someone's house, but a lot of times the public library, you might not even realize that they're in there. But they're waiting for mom and dad to get out of work. And there's nobody watching to see what they're doing. And nobody cares. Where do they work? Like I said, in my town, every business is run by teenagers. And so when I'm at the grocery store, I might be in a hurry, but I'm going to go through Ryan's line because I know that Ryan needs to have a conversation with me. And so I'll walk through her line. It'll take longer because she's chatting and I'm chatting, but I'm going to find out about her life in the grocery store line. I am now in the habit of buying more candy because we have some kids that work at the candy store in town. My hips don't need that, but I go in there and spend a little money on the penny candy with my kids. The sports fields, the skate park, the basketball court. We have a hockey rink in our town that's outdoors, and in the winter they're playing hockey there and ice skating. In the spring and summer they're playing pickup basketball. There's always, whenever I'm there with my kids who are playing baseball on the baseball fields, there are high school kids and middle school kids and college kids playing basketball. How can you just hop in and say, hey, do you need one more? The pizza shop, the mall, the strip mall, wherever it is, where are the kids? And let's go find them. Because they don't now have time to come to you. Like I said at the beginning, these are busy kids. If you do not have a driver's license, you aren't able to get anywhere. So they can't even, if they get home and mom and dad are making dinner and you have an evening youth group event, they might not be able to even get there. When COVID hit, I was surprised how many of my girls actually came to Zoom Bible study the first couple of weeks because they were like, I have nothing else to do. I'm always too busy to come to your stuff, Kelly. They're so busy that you have to go to where they are. In Matthew, Jesus said, therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. And I think sometimes we think that going, there, if you look this verse up, A lot of it is with like a map of the world that we're going to the nations. Well, you know that nations are now sending missionaries to the United States because we aren't sharing Christ with our own people. And so this is your mission field. The sports fields, the pizza shops, the high school, the plays, the ice cream shop, the grocery store, the concession stands. Go to where they are and build those relationships. Philip continues, and it says, "Then Philip ran out up to the chariot and heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet and asked him a question. 'Do you understand what you're reading?' Philip asked." And so now you're probably not going to run into a whole lot of kids sitting on the sports field with their Bible open so that you can automatically start a conversation with them about Jesus. There are a few, I will give you that. They've got their phones, and some of them are reading more than you think. But the goal here is the next word is to meet them. And in Young Life, we use a model of meeting. We call it contact work, is this idea of going to kids. And the first level of that is just being seen. You aren't meeting anybody. You are just going, you're showing up. If you're at that swim meet or that soccer game or the play, you are just going and you're being seen. And that's the first level of just being a part of it. And sometimes kids notice, because when somebody's there who isn't normally there, they're like, wonder who that is. And also, at a lot of those games, they happen before work ends. How many parents make it to every sporting event that their kid has? But sometimes that kid needs a fan. They need somebody in their corner cheering for them. So you're in this process of being seen, and as you're making your presence known to them and starting that face-to-face relationship, you're learning their name or recognizing it, but you've never even talked to them yet. And showing up is all you have to do. Just show up. Be consistent. The next step is where it takes a little bit of Jesus' Spirit-led confidence, is actually talking to kids. And for some of us, that comes easier than others. I don't have a problem meeting kids. I more have a problem meeting adults, But you walk up to a kid and find what you have in common. What Philip did with the Ethiopian is he's finding what they have in common. Isaiah is a book that they both would have had in common. And asking, do you understand what you're reading, is finding that common strand with him. And so I was at a basketball game, and I was supposed to meet 2 or 3 other teenagers there who all stood me up. Not the first nor the last time I've been stood up by a teenager. And I thought, well, I could just leave. Well, I drove 45 minutes to get to this basketball game. I'm going to stay. Okay, so I sit in the student section as an awkward, newly married, newly graduated from college individual thinking, I do not belong here. What am I doing here? I didn't go to this school. I don't know these people. But I sat down and I just had a conversation with the Lord as I was sitting there. And there was a clock on the wall, and I remember thinking very clearly, okay, when it gets to 5 after, I'm going to ask the girl next to me who had a program, hey, do you know who number 5 is? And then I always would carry some gum or something with me. All right, at 10 after, I'll offer her a piece of gum. I mean, like an awkward first date, right? And it's so much more natural to me now, but I remember that was the very first time walking into a place where I was so uncomfortable and I don't know anyone, and how do I do this? Now, adults walking into a kid's world, they actually more expect as you get older. I'd say that 20-something age is more awkward than as you get older. You have more of a reason to be somewhere when you're a member of the community than a 20-something who doesn't really know where they fit. Am I friends with this person? Am I not? But you are an adult walking in to learn names, to listen more than you speak, and to ask questions. And so the first thing would be, like I said, just be seen. The second one is when you start to actually talk to them. Find out a little bit more about their life. Maybe you've been through this grocery line 1,000,000 times and you've had the same cashier every time. Well, on the 5th time, you know what? I'm going to ask them, oh, do you go to school in town? Do you play any sports? Well, how is this job? Are you having a good day? This seems like it's been a long day. What's happening? Whatever the conversation is, start to have it. The next thing would be to actually spend time with kids. Once you have been doing this work of Jesus Spirit-led, going to where kids are, you get to a place where you develop these relationships. And people start to know who you are. They know that you're there as a member of your community, that you care for these kids. The YMCA quotes the 40 assets that every kid needs to be successful, and one of the top 10 is other adults in their life besides their parents. And you can go to the YMCA site and they quote it, and it's a national study. It has nothing to do with faith. Every kid needs adults in their life besides their parents. And so that is what I oftentimes say to people that I'm working with who might be leaders, who might be church members. They need all of us. They need to know that they're welcome. And so as you start to spend time with them, just like the 2 women in the video that Jake showed, I'm going to invite them to coffee. I suggest maybe we did hot chocolate. I had two girls I started with, and they ended up inviting a 3rd girl. I'd kind of met them in town, and I said, let's try every hot chocolate in town. And as we do that, would you guys mind if we read a little bit from the Bible each time? Sure, Kelly, that'd be great. You're paying for the hot chocolate, right? Yeah. Yes, I am. The nice donors of Young Life are paying for your hot chocolate. But let's just go on an adventure. We drove to a ski hill 30 minutes from us to try hot chocolate with these 3 freshman girls and me, just so that we could talk about Jesus. I don't care about hot chocolate. They then went on to build relationships with Jesus. They went to our summer camp, accepted him, and all because I just said, hey, do you want to go get some hot chocolate? I actually, when I started, didn't know it was going to become a thing. It was just a one-time hot chocolate date. Do it in pairs. 2 of you, hey, you guys want to come with us? Jesus sent people out in pairs. It's easier for us to do that. But find a way that you can spend time with them outside of those events then, And these are not kids necessarily that go to your church. You may say to a kid who is at your church, hey, do you want to go to this soccer game with me? They're like, why do you want to go to the soccer game? I just, I want to support the team. I want to, meet some new kids. Well, you end up discipling that kid while you're sitting at the soccer game, and then they're introducing you to their friends. Or ask them, hey, if we went to a game, what game should we go to? Maybe you're not into games. We had leaders during the pandemic who just played video games online with kids. That is not my domain, but my kids love that stuff. Our pastor of our church is new. She, for Advent, created a Minecraft world. And the kids from the church and any of their friends could join the Minecraft world for the Sundays of Advent and build Bethlehem together. Out of the box. I'm like, you're doing what? And my kids are like, we're doing Minecraft at church? What did they like? They don't like what you like. They just don't. But how do you take an interest in what they like? After the pandemic, a mom said to me, she's like, I'm so grateful for you and your husband because I cannot listen to my son talk about space anymore. He talks to me every day about this interest he has, and your husband will just sit there and listen and listen and listen and listen. I said, well, that's because we're not his parent. It's joyful for us. And they need that. They need people to listen. They need them to hear their silly puns and their stories that are not funny, and they just need listeners. They just need people who are going to listen to them. And so that piece of spending time with them requires an invitation. And you can search the Gospels for so many invitations from Jesus. He is always inviting somebody. And he really does. He takes the 12 disciples, but he really has that more intimate relationship with 3 of them. He takes them away. If you get a chance to take them to Pathfinder or go away for a weekend or do an overnight at a hotel, my boss gave us the challenge one year. I want you and your team to meet 100 kids in your high school. I was like, 100 kids? That's like a whole grade in my school. All right. And so 2 of my leaders are teachers, so they already know everybody. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to meet 100 kids. And I did. 100 kids. I started a spreadsheet, and I started writing down their names as I met them and how I met them. Very few of those kids came to my meetings as their point of our relationship starting. A lot of them were because I was coaching at the school, I was going to pep rallies, I was going to events, I was meeting them where they were at. And then we did what we called these bridge activities. And the bridges are, sometimes it's hard to go right from a meeting point to, hey, come to my church service. And so you need some bridges in between sometimes. And that can start with the hot chocolate or a meal or different things like that. But sometimes it looks like you and all of the other churches in town or the parachurches in town partnering together to throw a dodgeball tournament at the school. A lot of schools you can rent the gyms. Ours are $35 an hour. All of us got together, we paid the $35 an hour, we used all the different gyms, any kids could play, and then afterwards we did it. It was an FCA and all the youth group leaders and myself, and one year we had the FCA guy spoke, the next year I spoke, the next year the youth group person spoke. It became something that kids in our community looked forward to. That was a huge way that we met kids, and then would invite them then to come to Bible study, to come to our outreach meetings where we talk about Jesus. You may have to look at your events and decide, you know what, I have a small group Bible study, but I need a bridge outreach event where I'm going to tell a little bit about Jesus, but we're not going to open the Bible together yet. We're not there yet. You need to evaluate the kids that you're meeting, where are they at, and meet them where they're at. And what a lot of teenagers think of churches is that they're going to judge me as soon as I walk in the door, because it's all about my behavior, it's all about what I wear, it's all about what I've heard on the news. So I would suggest that you develop a really good poker face if you don't have it already. Kids have told me utterly shocking things. I'm like, oh, that's so nice. Yeah, let's, but maybe we're not going to delve into that until we've known each other for 6 months, right? We don't need to judge. That's not our job. Our job is to love, to welcome, to bring them in, to develop a relationship where then you can speak the truth in love, right? And I would say what happens then with Philip and the Ethiopian moves pretty quickly. And we know the reality of youth ministry does not move that quickly. But as you invite kids to come to more things, then your hope is then that they're going to come to church, right? That they're going to come to youth events, that they're going to start a discipleship relationship. Well, some of these kids that you meet may never set foot in your church building, but they will have experienced Jesus from this relationship that you have with them. And the hope is that you are launching them and bringing them into your building to feel comfortable so that this will be a lifelong faith. We're not looking for temporary faith. We're looking to launch kids long term. And so we want them to know that church is a safe space. So sometimes those first encounters are for things that are fun, for service projects. Every kid in New York State, I believe, needs 40 hours of community service. Where can they find that? At your church building. We're making blankets for the elderly. We're packing Operation Christmas Child shoeboxes. That's one of my kids' favorite events and a great thing to invite their friends to. We packed 170 boxes this year to send out and had a gospel presentation to kids who have never come and heard about the gospel. Whatever it is that your community needs, something that your community already does, find it. And so Philip goes deeper, and it says, after he says to him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" Philip said, "How can I, unless someone explains it to me?" So he invited Philip to come and sit with him, right? So first, Philip prays and listens to the angel of the Lord. Then he listens to the Spirit and goes, and he meets this man, and then he invites him to come and sit with him. The eunuch was reading this passage of Scripture. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before the shearer is silent, so he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation, he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. Philip isn't talking about church or church politics or what night youth group should be on. He was talking about Jesus. And that's what kids need. They need to hear about Jesus so that they can become lifelong followers of him, so that they can find their identity in him, so that they can make their choices and decisions based on him. And the eunuch, who would not have even been allowed in the temple because he was a eunuch, asked Philip, "Tell me, please, who is the prophet that you're talking about, himself or someone else?" He didn't know who Jesus was. Most of the kids that you will encounter in your communities have no reference to Jesus besides what they've seen on TikTok or on social media. They did not grow up in a church. They do not have church ties. You ask them, where do your parents want you to go to church? I have no idea. We're a generation out from where we need to be. And so he says, "Who is this?" Then Philip began with that very passage of Scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. And that's what we get to do. You get to share the good news about Jesus with a kid who has never heard it before. And as they traveled along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here is water. Why shouldn't I be baptized?" And he gave orders to stop the chariot. And then both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water, and Philip baptized him. We have friends who live in Philadelphia, and there's a Young Life group there. This friend of mine is a church youth group leader, and there was one kid who was going to the Young Life ministry. He's on the wrestling team. And he said to my friend Dave, the youth pastor, he said, "I want to bring a bunch of these wrestling guys to a Bible study, but I'm not sure they're going to come to church yet." So they started meeting for breakfast, Dave and this high school wrestling team. And they started talking about life, reading the Bible together. And he found out that none of these kids had a background. They knew nothing about Jesus. But suddenly this one boy was answering questions and talking about Job and talking about all these different people in the Bible. And he's like, how do you know that? He's like, well, since we started meeting, I just started reading the whole Bible. There are Christians who have been going to church their whole lives who have not read the whole Bible. But this teenager wanted answers, and he wanted to know. He wanted to know what this guy Jesus was all about. All because one teenager knew my friend Dave and said, "Hey, would you talk to my friends?" So I wanted to tell you just a quick story about these two girls that I met. We met at the school play, Caitlin and Sydney. Their father was the principal of the school. They had just moved there. My husband was doing the stage crew for this play, and I was just a participant. I had no children in the school, but I met these two girls. Both of these girls now know Jesus. Caitlin will be 30 this year. We walked through life together. They babysat for my kids. They still babysit for my kids, and Caitlin's a hairdresser, so I get free haircuts too. There are some benefits of this youth ministry stuff. But I sat in a lot of driveways with them, listening to their woes, listening to their questions, talking about life, answering what they needed me to answer. And then they brought in their friend Samantha, and those few years I spent a lot of time with those 3 girls. There's an author, Matthew Kelly, who writes some books, and he said that there's a spiritual multiplication. It's not rocket science. I'm not a mathematician. But basically, if your mission is to meet 3 young people and then share Jesus with them and disciple them and be consistent in that, then you plus your 3, then you teach them to disciple 3 more, right? It takes 19 cycles to reach 1 billion people. Crazy. 19 cycles of 3 people sharing with 3 people, or sharing with 3 people, or sharing with 3 people, reach 1 billion people. You take 1 more cycle of that, you're at 5 billion people. This book that he wrote is called The Biggest Lie in the History of Christianity, is that we cannot change this world. We're not capable of that. It's too big. 3 people. It's all I would challenge you to, is find 3 people, 3 young people to pour your life into. If you have a team that's, of a few people, and each of them has 3 people, your whole church can change. The whole ministry can change. 3 people at a time. So that would be my challenge and my prayer for you. So the idea, though, is so simple. You pray, you go, you meet, and you invite. And you do that over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. I've said to people that I feel like sometimes I'm in a very cyclical job. I've been to the prom every year for the last 25 years. Wherever it is, show up and be consistent, because that's what kids need. They have enough people who come into their life and leave. They need people who are going to show up and who are going to be consistent in their life. And I would not be here without Mrs. Frankowski and my church ladies. I went back to that church senior year in high school. I went all the way through. But I went back that year and I said, because my young life leader had said, Kelly, go get involved in your church. I was like, well, what does that mean? I went back and I said, I want to teach Sunday school. And the Sunday school superintendent looked at me like, what in the world is this crazy girl talking about? And she's like, I'll get back to you. And through a process that they went through with the church, they let me teach 6th grade Sunday school by myself. And I taught that whole year. I was never so excited to go to church because I had a reason and a purpose to be there. I taught those 6th graders, and we brought in high school ministers to help us. All my high school friends would come, and we paired them, 1 6th grader with a high school kid. Didn't matter if they went to our church or not. All those high school kids were coming too. I ran into that woman a couple of months ago, and she said, I need to apologize to you. I said, for what? She said, when you asked me if you could teach Sunday school, I said, that's the worst idea I've ever heard of. And she said, and then we were having a theological discussion about something you wanted to teach on, and I said, oh, that's not right. That's wrong. And and she never had said anything to me about it. I went on and taught that. I don't even know what it was. And she said, I learned several years later that you were right as a 18-year-old. It didn't mean as much to me, I don't think, that we ran into each other that day. But there are kids that could teach Sunday school. There are kids who could run your ministries. There are kids who want a leadership role. We had a group of kids who were told, hey, give us all your ideas. And then they came to me and they were like, Kelly, my pastor asked me for all these ideas and no one's ever called me and asked me to do anything. Call them, ask them to do something. They might just say yes. So we've got some time for some questions if you want to come up to the mic. I don't have all the answers, but I'll try my best.
At one point, my church, we're a very small church, we had 5 individuals in our church who were substitute teachers in the school. And the school became to know that we would volunteer. And my husband is the pastor of the church, and him and I still substitute teach almost every day. And it's amazing the impact that kids, we don't get into theological discussions, but the kids can at least relate, hey, this guy's a minister, and he's coming into our school, and he's a real person. And you get that free information if you just listen, what I call free information. One day I was sitting in English, and I heard some kids talking in the front, and I heard one kid say, and I don't even know how they got on the conversation, I'd really like to read through the Bible, but I don't think I could do that. I don't know anybody who's read through the Bible, right? And it was during a free time. And so I just, I was eavesdropping. I said, I've read through the Bible. And I said, you know that they actually have graphic novel Bibles that you can read through the whole Bible. I said, if you don't know somebody who can find one for you, let me know and I'll get one for you. So just the free information you get from being present where the kids are.
Yes. Yeah.
So say hypothetically, if you're a person who has her master's degree and, going to get certified and you may be called to teach in a public school, or even volunteer, what advice would you give to those people in those kind of contexts about navigating some of those waters in the most efficient and effective way to not only show Christ but also keep your job?
Yep, definitely. So my husband is a teacher in a public school, and so we are asked that question quite often, actually. How do you not blur the lines? And when I was coaching, the mayor of our town actually asked me, he's like, isn't that like a conflict of interest? Like you as the youth leader coming to school? And I said, I know my place. This is a public school. I'm not allowed to talk about Jesus here in a formal way. I'm not allowed to invite people to things in this context. We have a wonderful relationship with our school because they know that we're there. And one of the things that has shown them that is that we show up when there's tragedy. We do grief counseling. We've been in the school for a lot of those different things. And so we actually started to get referrals from the principal after a while of like, hey, you should go to Young Life for all these kids who were really struggling because we had earned the right to be heard. We had spent time on the turf. We had been with them. We had proved that we weren't going to cross those boundaries, that we wouldn't be disrespectful, that we would not use a church or a school building as a church building. Like there are boundaries in this life. A lot of those conversations happen anyway of kids figuring things out and asking you questions, but you're not crossing those lines. And the other thing is like in telling you go and meet kids, like you are not a creeper. And so like don't creepily go and do things. Like you are living your life above reproach and doing things in ways that are that are okay with the administration and with the people that are there. And sometimes that requires you to be honest. I mean, my husband said to the superintendent, hey, I'm a Young Life leader. Sometimes I pick up high school kids and drive them to events, and I go to camp with them, and I stay in a cabin with them, and I just want you to know that so that you understand that that's a part of what we do. But then he's a coach. He's not allowed to drive kids from practice home. So there's a line there, I could pick you up at 7 at your house and take you to Young Life, but I can't drive you from practice right to Young Life. So you have to play within the rules and the boundaries that are established.
This is a question from online, from William, and it kind of goes along with the same thing. He says, do you ever have problems with parents who are concerned that a Christian they don't know too well is meeting with and teaching their kids?
Yep. So I would say the first distinction I make is middle schoolers, everything goes through a parent. And you know, like everything has to go through. I don't ask a middle school kid for their cell phone number or any of their contact information. That is all through parents. And so once they get to 9th grade, somehow that seems to be a distinction of, even within the Ministry of Young Life, we have a paper form that we have to sign if we're going to deal with a middle schooler's private information. You do not have to do that with a high schooler. But I am very careful. I think it goes two ways, that I don't want to deceive that student and tell things that they're telling me to their parent and vice versa, but the parent needs to know who you are and that you're involved in their life. And sometimes they might say, no, I'm sorry. I do know that there are some kids who are not always fully honest about what they're doing, and I find that out after the fact of, like, you know, we had some students who were coming who were saying that they were going to photography club because they wanted to hear about Jesus, and their parents wouldn't approve. And so, you know, trying to navigate through that. But then their parents looked at all the information and signed them up to go to camp with us. So it's a person-by-person situation of dealing with parents, but they are very much a huge part of what we do, and making sure that they understand. And you know, you never want to pull the wool over somebody's eyes. You know, you are there, and you want to be an extra adult. A lot of times, I'm a mentor to them. I'm helping them with advice, different things, but you never want to leave the Jesus part out, because if they find that out later, that's not okay. And sometimes you have a ministry to a whole family, and the whole family ends up meeting Christ. I've seen that many, many times, where the kid is the one who's dragging the family to church or dragging them to an event that they want to see.